Welcome to BamfordRose and another question of the week. This week we're in a classic Vanquish. This classic Vanquish has just had the whole auto shift manual gearbox system bulletproofed by us, and the question is that bulletproof process really worth it? Let's take the classic Vanquish for a drive and find out. Taking a drive in a classic Vanquish is always a wonderful thing. It's a privilege to be sat in the driver's seat of a classic Vanquish. What makes this drive even more enjoyable is the cosy, warm, reassuring feeling that you get knowing that the gearbox, the automated shift manual system on this car, is never going to let you down because it's been totally bulletproofed. Only a Vanquish owner will know too well that apprehensive feeling you get when you try to start the car and paddle into neutral, and you're always apprehensive that the car is actually going to go into neutral and start, and then when you're on the move it actually does change gear and behave how it should do. A lot of Vanquish owners suffer that apprehensive feeling because the car has never been through a process of trying to iron out all gearbox errors or mechanical failures or faults, often because that process can be very expensive, meaning that cars are always left with niggles in that system, which cause problems such as skipping gears during shifting on pedals, or failure to select reversed or first when you're stationary, or failure to enable an engine start at all. Maybe the problem's clear with an ignition cycle, maybe the continual skipping of a gear an owner can live with, and quite often you find Vanquish in the marketplace that are harbouring problems that, probably due to the cost, the owners never really get to the bottom of and fix. I say probably due to the cost because there are very few garages out there that really understand the Vanquish gearbox system and can really repair it and set it up properly so it works faultlessly. But if you were to bulletproof the system in a sort of once and for all way, then just like this car now, you can get the gearbox and gear system to the point where it should be good for 30 or 40,000 miles without any corrective action. And that dependability of getting in the car and every single time you know it's going to start, you know you're going to be able to select gears, you know that you're going to be able to drive to your final location without a breakdown. That's just a wonderful feeling. Now, as an owner, you'd have to be committed to keeping the car and enjoying it for the long term, because bulletproofing a gearbox system is certainly not cheap. But before we talk about the specifics of bulletproofing your Vanquish gearbox, let's take this for a drive through the gears and just experience how wonderful a Vanquish is. Once you've got the engine started and you are ready to pull away, easy check just to see that the clutch is in good health is just put it in first gear, and on level ground when you're off the brakes, just slightly go on throttle. Look at the rev counter. Now we're ticking over at about 750 RPM, and with a dab of throttle we just want to see that take up of drive it is instant. So we're already starting to move forward here before the rev counter goes above 1000 RPM. So we're at 750 tick over, slight dab of throttle, and there we are moving, and we're about 900 RPM and moving. On cars that have got worn out clutches, you'll be dabbing the throttle, you'll be going up to about 1500 RPM, and they'll just be starting to slip the clutch and move forward at that point. So when we go through the gearbox of a classic Vanquish, what we want to do is interrogate each individual component, each individual part of the system, run a few tests, perform the actions on that component manually that component has to do, and just thoroughly make sure that it is fit for purpose. This is where garages that don't really understand how the entire Vanquish system works properly, or they can set it up properly. This is how and why those garages fall over. They are presented with a problem. Maybe the owner is saying that it's skipping a gear, and maybe just think, oh, it must be the ASM pack or setup or something like that. Maybe fix that problem at quite considerable expense, but then not properly have gone through the rest of the system, and that car has still got problems. And this is where owners get really frustrated, because they've spent a lot of money on repairing the problem, but then gearbox problems just keep persisting. So our approach is to understand what the owner is reporting, what problems they're experiencing, but then go through each individual component. Now, unfortunately, when you go through it like that and you do pick up on a few parts of the system, the stack up of costs to repair many parts can add up. But for the long term, for dependability, for robustness of the system, to ensure against as much as you can a breakdown, it really needs to be that comprehensive fix or nothing at all. So we'll go through a few components now and just discuss their functionality and what they cost to repair or bulletproof. When you pull open the driver's door handle on a classic Vanquish, you will hear the gearbox pump prime. This enables the system to get to about 3/4 of its operating pressure, and the pump, when it runs, it should be nice and crisp and quick. It shouldn't be a long laboured sound. A long laboured sound is indication that the pump needs renewing. Aston Factory want to charge about £1,200 plus VAT for a new gearbox pump, ASM pump, but it's exactly the same as the pump that you can buy from a Fiat dealer, apart from it's in a Fiat box instead of an Aston Martin box, and that retails for about £350. Then when you sit in the car and turn the ignition and double paddle to get neutral to enable start, at that double paddle is when the gearbox pump runs for a second time and gets up to full operating pressure. If the time taken on the first prime and that second prime was too long because the pump is weak and the system doesn't get up to operating pressure, after that double paddle you won't get crank enable and you won't be able to start the engine. So pump is the first sort of part of the chain, part of the process of the gearbox system on Vanquish. So now when you come to select first or reverse after it's gone into neutral before starting, that's going to check out operation of the ASM pack. And problems with the ASM pack could be that it's not securely or properly mounted on the side of the gearbox. This was a service bulletin to increase the strength and mating strength of those fixings. The shaft itself could have some wear in it. This is a selector shaft from the ASM pack to the gear shifter housing. The H plate selector in the shift mechanism can suffer some stiction. The solenoids and internal pressure and movement of the shaft from hydraulic pressure could also be suffering problems. Maybe the internal bores, the internal passages of the ASM pack have corroded, and there's some pressure bleed through, and it's just not allowing the full range of motion to go across the gate or fore and aft to put the gear in its position. That would then lead to each individual gear position being correctly learned and correctly in the right place. There's a programming feature to do that, and any Aston owner will, or anyone that's scoured forums will know that that's called the octopus test. Whether it can learn that process or not is largely down to the transmission control unit. It can suffer problems writing to the erasable programmable read-only memory section, or the transmission control module can have other internal errors, communication network errors, or keep alive memory errors. We're then relying on the clutch being good. I spoke earlier about how you can just do a quick pull away and assess sort of clutch life or clutch performance, but a laptop on the car can understand the wear statistics and very easily determine whether a clutch is in good health or not. There's a couple of position sensors and speed sensors that can sometimes report errors, but these are really easy to find because there'll be a fault code generated for those if they were in error. And pretty much fundamentally the only other part of the system will be the paddles themselves in the cabin and the micro switches which give out the signal to go up or down the gearbox. Each one of those components and a good load of experience on this system has taught us many in-house test techniques to check out the functionality of each of those individual components rather than relying on the laptop to say that everything is good and there are no faults. We really want to test each one of those components perhaps away from the car and doing specific tests to them to know that they are 100% perfect without any intermittent faults creeping in that you might not be able to detect through the laptop or the diagnostic tool alone. That good old-fashioned engineering activity is very different from plugging in a computer and computer says yes or no. Unfortunately, in garages, certainly franchise dealers and a lot of garages these days, technicians plugging in computers and relying on what the computers tell them is pretty much the extent of their diagnostic capability. This particular Vanquish came from France. I think the owner had been through a few different franchise dealers, maybe a couple of specialists, and niggling problems, disabling a drive, causing the car to break down, just plagued this Vanquish. The owner's really into the car. It's a beautiful Vanquish, this one, and it wanted to invest in the car to make it perfect. So we took this car in and ran that complete diagnostic check and test on every single component that I just spoke about. The pump had already been renewed on this car, so the pump was good, but it needed a complete refurbishment on the ASM pack. We don't do that internally, we send it to SS Autotech, do an absolutely fantastic job of refurbishing Vanquish ASM pack. It needed a complete new clutch assembly, flywheel, cover plate, friction plate and slave cylinder. Now, a couple of niggles that previous garages couldn't get to the bottom of was intermittent signal coming out of the micro switches used to paddle up and paddle down gears, which are situated on the steering wheel cowl. The other quirk was that although the transmission control unit was alive and it was shifting gears okay and running the pump, running the ASM pack, running the clutch, everything was good with the transmission control unit. In that regard, it wouldn't run through a gear position learn procedure, and it wouldn't run through a clutch learn procedure, and it wouldn't save those adaptive values to its erasable programmable read-only memory. There was no fault code to say that it hadn't done that. It appeared to run through the test okay, but wouldn't update those new values into the adaptation side of the transmission control unit. Now obviously it's very easy to check that new adaptation values are currently held within the transmission control unit, but I guess previous garages had just been told by the laptop that the procedure, the test, the adaptation process procedure had worked, took that on face value and didn't think to interrogate further to check that it actually had been updated. That's the sort of meticulous approach that you need on this car. So what does it cost to bulletproof your Aston Martin Vanquish gearbox? Pump, about £350. A clutch assembly from Aston Martin factory is a whopping £4,500. An ASM refurbishment is going to come out at about £1,500. A new or refurbished transmission control unit, £750. And micro switches that sit on the steering wheel cowl, about £895. There's probably about £3,000 in labour to diagnose the system and refit as necessary all of those parts, meaning that the job is probably going to come in at about £11,000. Now, we've done some previous videos on different transmission alternatives for classic Vanquish. There's a manual conversion available. I really don't like that for many reasons. This car should remain paddle shift. Or for approximately £18,000, there is an auto gearbox conversion available in the marketplace, which I'm driven and I think that is a really good conversion. The car drives nicely on an auto. Gearbox is very personal, and whether it's manual, whether it's auto shift manual on pedals, whether it's a conventional auto, then each individual will have to go and make their own mind up as to which they like the best. Now, your car might not need an ASM pack rebuild, it might not need a clutch, might not need the micro switches, so your cost to bulletproof could be significantly less than the £11,000. But whether it was the full £11,000 or maybe £6,000 or £7,000, in my opinion, both options are the best course of action to end up with a sports car, luxury car, paddle shift gearbox that performs faultlessly and you can depend on. Now, there are Vanquish out there for sale at quite cheap prices, and some of these cars are harbouring gear shift issues. Probably maybe a cheeky offer bags one of those cars, and then you know that your £11,000 to bulletproof the gearbox will future-proof it, and you'll be able to drive and enjoy that car without any worries. Really love to hear your experiences on classic Vanquish gearbox. Hope you liked that question of the week, and as always, really helps us if you can like, comment and subscribe to our channel. We'll see you on the next question of the week.